Feels funny to having the transmitter in the pocket of my trousers. But I have 2 kids already, so let's see. It's not healthy as far as I heard. Yeah. Are we ready? Do we need this? No, I don't worry. Yeah, so let's go ahead. I am not Chris, I'm Mike. So just in case you want to switch, I'm not Andrea neither. So the other 2 sessions will be in the other room. So we somehow stick to the switch of the sessions. Adaptive organizations change by design. You will wonder what that means. Well, we talk a lot about agile. And as I said already in the morning, I'm a little bit more keen on adaptiveness because it's maybe going beyond agile, especially how we carry on in organizations. Agile is very much focused on the Agile Manifesto, on software development, on IT, on specific practices. And actually, we want to go beyond because as an organization, adaptation means way more. It means basically somehow reacting to the environment and not just as a department, but for the whole organization. Change is really a very interesting topic for me because I have 2 kids at home who are very, very tiny, small. The one is 8 months old, the other one is 3 years now in 2 weeks. And this really keeps me going. So I really had to change a lot in my mind. I always say my older son, 3 years old, is a complex, non-adaptive system. So he's complex, I don't understand him, and he doesn't react to the environment, which basically is me, parts of it. So I'm really dealing with, change. How can I influence it? How can I support it? How can make it easier? How can I even find out if it makes sense for the single human being? A little bit about myself. I work mainly in the German-speaking area. So this means Austria, which is my home base. I live in Vienna, work in Vienna, and a little bit around Germany, Switzerland usually too. And I also do international stuff. For example, Sprint Consulting is my partner here in Hungary. We regularly do courses on Management 3.0, thanks to Jürgen, who is the inventor of Management 3.0. Kanban leadership, Kanban, let's say, implementation courses where we really dive deep on practices and how to apply this. Topics. I'm an agile lean coach, lean and agile coach, systemic coach, however you take it. I mainly spent my time with lean and agile stuff on the one hand side. And I went further with my education, really diving into systemic coaching. So I did a master degree on systemic coaching after I spent a couple of years at Daimler Chrysler, 10 years in internal operations within IT. My basics is informatics, business informatics. So I just thought about, well, if you really want to deal with social systems and people, you have to go further than just having experience. I am an accredited Kanban trainer. And I'm a non-accredited Scrum trainer. I like that somehow to mix it up. So I do Scrum trainings. I help teams to work with this method. And there's, of course, many, many more methods. I'm a licensed Management 3.0 facilitator. Not sure if this is right, Jürgen, as a kind of term. I rather like the term facilitator and not trainer, actually, because training these things is not so easy. It's really about facilitating a learning space and helping people who are not so used to other different styles of management, leadership, start practicing, start experiencing, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's me. Question: who thinks he or she works in a truly adaptive organization? Stephen, of course. You always work in adaptive and with adaptive organization. Nobody else? Maybe a little bit? Here's a little bit. Now comes the question, what do we mean by adaptive? Yeah, truly. What do we mean? What do you understand if I ask you for an adaptive organization? Maybe just a few keywords. Pardon? Yeah? Something else? What's your cases? Where do you think is your organization adaptive?
Not only quick, but also respond to change.
Responding to change, yeah. Yeah, that's a few things. So sense and respond, by the way, the title of Stephen's book I like very much in relation to this term. And obviously the question here is, why do we need actually adaptive organizations? What is it? How can we get there? And yeah, it's not an easy task. Adaptive organizations, first of all, obviously have one challenge. They have to react to the environment. And reacting to the environment was always the case. But there's just one thing today. It's a bigger challenge because the environment has started changing faster and faster and faster. So the future is still uncertain, but it's just arriving faster than ever. So we experience the future way more faster than ever. And this is probably pretty much due to the digital revolution we saw over the past 10 years. So access to resources is not the big thing anymore. It's really about building new services, connecting people, communicating, hearing the voice of the customer very directly, and so on and so forth. And we all see business models disrupting markets, new fresh business models. If you think about Uber taxi, if you think about Airbnb, there are banking models coming up where the core banks really have to consider which business they are in and which business they want to be in the future. So nearly no company, nearly no organization can anymore sit back and just say, well, we are in a very conservative business, and just say, well, let's see what happens, no need for change. That's not the case. Anything can happen and disrupt your market quickly. The next thing about adaptiveness is we have to think end to end. We heard this already today a couple of times. When we talk about agile, very often we just focus on, as I just said, a single view out of the big picture. We run Scrum in a couple of teams. We run Kanban, whatever it is, within the IT department. But unfortunately, it doesn't get out to the customer as quickly as it was built. And maybe it should. Sometimes we have these terms like water scrum fall, as you probably heard about it. So we've got a big upfront, whatever elaboration of requirements. We have a very fast and responding team in the middle, but unfortunately, there is a big block down there at operations, people who really see Scrum as a disruption for their service level agreements, and they're not happy to be, taken at risk. So in order to be successful, we have to think end to end. Now, what's different today, by the way, this is quite interesting because this is not really new. As I said in the morning, Jim Highsmith already wrote about adaptive leadership, I think in the early 2000s. But as I said, we actually better understand nowadays how to run fast learning organizations, which we call startups nowadays. And it's a different type of startup as we had it in the early 2000s, of course. It's not anymore about a high cash burning rate. It's about fast learning, fast failure, early failure, and pivoting. So permanently reacting to the environment. It's about digital innovation, as I just said before. Business models change a lot, and we don't know what's coming next tomorrow. Now, the problem here still for normal organizations is that actually people get lost in daily operations. So we're, as Stephen always say, we're just busy, bang, bang. We're trying to do our jobs as good as it gets. We're living with a couple of dysfunctions. Managers or leadership is sometimes really under pressure, not really knowing what should be the next step. It's not an easy job. And shareholder value, this bad thing, is usually the only, let's say, target which management is being measured on. So they try to improve this as good as it gets. They try to focus on the short-term win instead of a long-term effect. And what we lose here is actually purpose, mission, value. There's a nice picture. I saw this at Mary's presentation somewhere ago from the book Running Lean. And it's about, the the metaphor of a football game or soccer game. And the question here is, what would we need to be successful as a team playing this game? Well, any ideas from your side? If we run this game as a team, what do we need in order to win, in order to be successful? Any ideas? Pardon? A good coach, okay. What else? If I'm standing on the field, if I'm running there, what do I need? A goal, yeah. I should have a goal. There is something else going on here. There are others running around. Maybe I should see them too. Maybe I should hear the whistle of the referee, just in case something is being stopped, and so on and so forth. Now, there is a nice other side of this medal in this book, and this is reality, as we see it in many, many large organizations, which basically means we're playing on the field, but everyone is more or less playing their own game. Everybody's sitting in his tent or her tent, having their own ball, playing their own rules, not hearing, listening, not really interacting, and finally, of course, well, we are totally busy, but we don't really score a goal here. So this is the big challenge, how to get out of here. Well, we know that in the agile arena, this doing versus being is a kind of discussion. And very often, as a reaction of what we just saw before, we introduce practices. We just say, well, let's start Scrum, maybe things become better. Let's do any other kind of method. But unfortunately, this is just practices. We didn't really maybe think about why did we do that? Why did we actually pursue this? And after a while, we actually figure out, obviously, we didn't prepare the environment to make this happen, to make it a success. So Scrum can't work if we just say, well, let's live with a couple of dysfunctions. These are our boundaries, we can't do anything about it. We have to dive deeper. Diving deeper actually means before we start any practice, getting out of this mess we saw before, basically means, well, what do we think as an organization has to change? What would be the principles which could make us, and I always say could make us more successful, because this is just a hypothesis. We don't know. There might be promises on the market, Scrum promising everything, but this doesn't really mean on this level anything. We really want to dive deeper. And finally, being successful at all, we also have to think about, and what do the people in the organization on different levels actually consider being worth pursuing? What do they need? What is the values they buy into? This is very important. It's a big difference being up there. It's not a religious discussion, being or doing. It's rather a more, let's say, wise approach of saying, start with why first, and then think about what helps here. We all know this, Scrum, if we just, do it, there are usually many, many flavors of dysfunctions in an organization. And this is just a list I made out of my own experience. You probably share similar experiences. I've got this product owner, the owner of the vision, the owner of the product backlog, the features, the decisions. Well, that's nice, this is a responsibility, but it's probably over the long term not a good baseline for collaboration. I mean, it's really, we have to think about together, how can we make something happen? How can we make a product getting out to the market? And this is obviously not just a product owner and management stakeholder, whatever decision. It's a collaborative effort. Team sheltered by Scrum Master. It's a very early dysfunction happening very often with Scrum, when we, of course, come in an environment which is maybe disruptive, people always getting disturbed, and we just try to provide them a kind of quiet and, let's say, stable working environment. This is nice, but basically we want to collaborate. How can we collaborate if we close doors? If somebody like a Scrum Master starts sheltering people from other people, teams from other teams, teams from product owners or management. This is not the intention of Scrum, but it's a typical dysfunction very often seen and very often not early enough touched and not early enough worked upon. Sprints not being interrupted. Well, this is a nice one again, stable environment. But what if we want to react on the environment? If something changed outside and something important has to be considered, what is more important, the business or the sprint? Team committing to results, this term has been even changed because it was always taken as a kind of hard word. Commitment means basically, if you won't make it, we will punish you. You will, be somehow, counted on your failure, and failure is bad, so will be blamed upon. This is again something where we already feel a kind of dysfunction because we need to get together, make estimations, what we can do, forecasting as it's called today, and consider, okay, failure is something, well, which can be even embraced. If it appears, what do we do with it? How can we get better on it? Team or attaining of a daily, you know that. So, the daily being a holy grail, only the team is allowed to speak. So these are these dysfunctions we even don't want to see. Velocity, another one. The questions we can raise here is, do we just employ practices? Do we just follow practices? Or wouldn't it be better actually to ask why? Does all these things make sense? So it's not about religiously following rules. It's really about considering, hey, what makes sense here? What might we do differently? How do we deal with dysfunctions when we encounter them? And how do we make sense of the environment? And the environment goes further beyond a single team. It goes further beyond the IT department. Very important Scrum values at this point. I just want to point it there. You probably know them. When they come into place, this is something where we want to collaborate on these. It's not only the team values, it should be the value of the whole organization collaborating on product and service generation. Kanban, quite similar. Look at Kanban. Just pick the two very famous, very well-known methods and approaches. And also here we have very often teams who started with Kanban, but really didn't go beyond why are we doing this? What do we want to achieve? Constantly asking, how could we get further? How could we get next to our, let's say, mission? Improve. We might see just a board with stickies on a wall. Well, might be a good attempt, but at a certain point there might be red stickers on certain other stickies, so what do we do out of it? Well, I don't know, we can't do anything because it's due to the other department, it's due to the architecture, it's due to the technology. So this is not the idea behind Kanban. Not thinking across borders, just the same thing. We want to improve here in this single team. This is fine. This is a very common approach in many organizations, but it doesn't really solve the core problem. We have to think end-to-end. End-to-end really means not only the single technology, not only the single team, but finally down to operations, up to marketing, up to business, whoever is involved. Really delivering what the customer needs, what the environment needs as fast as possible in order to learn as fast as possible. Now, exactly the same questions we can ask here, and yeah, again, we also have a set of values, values which are very often just forgotten or missed when we think about Kanban as a practice. So first of all, we start with understanding, way more important than a board. We want to understand why are we doing this, whom are we doing that for, and we want to agree upon, let's take a first step. Let's go on and improve. We want to have customer focus. We want to understand who are the customers whom we are actually dealing with right now and maybe in the future. And respect, another very important one. So values are very, very important to make change succeed. Now, another one which is very, very important, as I believe, we might think about change for a business, adapting for a business in different contexts. As I just said before, it's maybe different for a bank to consider speed of their operations compared to a kind of e-business shop. But what I believe is important for nearly every organization to consider innovation. I don't believe that innovation is any more, let's say, well-placed in typical R&D departments, that innovation maybe doesn't have to be considered for certain organizations. Because I already said, business models can change rapidly. And even the most conservative business models nowadays might be disrupted tomorrow. So you have to bring innovation as a kind of key capability towards your teams. It has to happen actually on the fringe. It has to happen down where operations are happening, where people are working. It's not a side effort. It's not a separate department, a separate budget. It has to happen basically all the time. Change is a hard thing. You know the J-curve effect probably. What does it mean? Well, there are probably situative differences how we can approach change. There are usually two dimensions. It's about resistance. So sometimes we just don't want to change because we feel comfortable with what we're currently doing. We don't want the new CMMI, Scrum, Kanban, ITIL, whatever model. We don't want this. It's effort. And sometimes it even doesn't work. Why should we buy into? There is another dimension, which is fear. So sometimes there might be a reorganization, there might be a merger, there might be something where we even fear, become anxious, and also, drop in terms of our performance. Both dimensions are basically blockers for change. What happens typically in a changing environment? Managers would come in, consultants would come in, and they would propose, okay, we are in a current state A, and obviously we want to go for a state B, and so they draw a nice project into the future and say, okay, that's the project we have to pursue. It can be a very large one, usually based upon blueprints. Accenture, however companies are called, are very good at this. They have business models for doing this. And then they just engage the organization to say, okay, over the past 12 months, 18 months, we have to pursue this, work hard on it. Now, this is one thing. The other thing is, okay, what happens next? People basically don't follow easily because of what I said, fear, resistant, and so on and so forth, this projection. They're living in a culture. They are working in a complex system. They're working in a complex adaptive system. They're working in a social system. They're human beings. They actually fear or might resist, so actually performance usually, first of all, drops. So the performance doesn't go towards where management actually wanted the organization to be. And then there is the only question, when will the organization recover and get on track back where we want them to be? If this valley here, there is a couple of models from psychologists. There is a Satir model, there's a Kübler-Ross model, which basically go into the same direction. If this valley of tears, there's a German psychotherapist who calls it valley of tears, is too deep, it might be very hard to recover the organization in general. There might be really fear about the whole reorganization, and people are just trying to cover their ass. You won't get them engaged with the change. If the duration is too long, so if the performance doesn't go up, typically the consultants get fired and another one gets hired. So either way, it's not working as the management, as the organization wanted it to be. And it might have been just a good will, a good intent. They might have not known anything better. And the only problem here, there's another one, is what do we think about B? This is the future state, 1 year ahead, 2 years ahead. How sure can we be that this future still exists as we projected it today? Probably not. Probably this future won't be there anymore. Well, gratefully, management will have been promoted to any other position or to another company, so they will not be pursued being responsible for this. Maybe we don't even understand A very well. maybe we're not really sure where are we currently and what step should we undertake. So this J-curve is a very powerful model, very simple one to discuss the challenges of change. And what can you do about it? Well, thinking about this approach here, one alternative could be considering little J-curves, considering adapting in little steps and learning on your way. And with each little or smaller step, you might consider, okay, what could be the next one? Or if we took a step, maybe it failed, but it's still not the whole initiative which failed. We can still make a step back. So what can we do in general about it? How can we act as leaders then to make the organization more adaptive? What can we do as teams, as individuals, and how can the organization itself shift forward towards a better being? And don't get me wrong, again, I believe that organizations are very different in terms of their setting, in terms of their DNA, where they come from, and what they can achieve, where they can go to. Not sure if you know the book Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. It's just another model describing how the evolution of organizations happened from the past until now and what we actually currently foresee for the future. This is not just about history, it's really about paradigm shifts. It's about totally different ways of thinking about collaboration and working together in organizations. It's getting away from command and control systems towards high trusted organizations, towards a highly creative environment. Quite a complex model with its different shades of colors. I usually take it easier. I just take 3 different types of organizations. There is the first one, which is the more, let's call it, stealth mode. It's an organization where we are basically just trying to continue playing on this football field. You know, there might be a couple of people who want to trigger change, but basically we continue playing the game as it is, as good as it gets. And I assume there are many organizations out there still in this mode. As I said, they might apply Scrum here and there, but basically they're still doing the same old stuff. I worked for such organizations in the automotive industry. Then there might be the organizations who really got the need to do something about it, who made this move, this first shift into an area where they reconsider, how do we actually lead? How do we apply leadership here? How can we actually, let's say, redesign our organization? They might not yet be on their way, but they have the intent to do this. And then, of course, there are the organizations who are already operating a model which is for many just a kind of wishful thinking. Spotify might be not a good example for a big automotive group because it's a totally different DNA. But again, many look at these kinds of organizations saying, wow, they're totally flat. They have a totally different system, how they operate their work, how they collaborate. Now, anyway, when we look into this, the first thing which is very important to take a kind of holistic view. Because now one might come up and say, well, customer first. There is a couple of approaches here where they say everything has to focus on the customer. There are other ones where they say everything has to focus on the employee. I think there is this company in India called HCL. They turned the pyramid more or less upwards down. And they just say employees first, and that's what we even tell our customers, because we believe when our employees are happy, then finally this will contribute to your success too. This is nice, but it's just one shade of gray. It's very important. So don't go into the trap to focus on one single element in here. And this is just, again, a kind of examples. So you really have to balance this out. You really have to take a kind of systems view. Next, you have to start with why. You have to focus on what is actually our purpose, our understanding of being. our mission, and you have to align people. You have to make people thinking, acting, looking into the same direction. This is a very interesting one. I usually do this kind of exercise, close your eyes, and I just ask people, where do you think is north? And then, well, open your eyes again, you will see everybody's targeting into a different direction, and we can say, okay, is this a good place to start our journey together? Now, if you think about a large organization, you can imagine there will be many, many people targeting in different directions. How can we start a journey here? Leadership, and I think that's the most important thing. When we talk about change, it doesn't happen by itself, just by magic. So we need to inject, we need to introduce some kind of energy into the system to make it move. Leadership is the key here. Now, this is the big thing, uncertainty. The future is uncertain, and as I said, it's just arriving faster. This is not very comfortable for many organizations. It's not comfortable for leaders, for managers, and sometimes often not for teams. But there is one interesting thing. Uncertainty is actually our friend. Why? Because, well, if we wouldn't have any uncertainty, it would be obviously not useful to, compete. Because then we would know everything about the future, there wouldn't be any risk. We wouldn't actually have business. We wouldn't have a possibility to differentiate. So vice versa, uncertainty can be used, it can be utilized. It's just a question how. Well, very easy. First of all, we open your eyes. With the keynote of Stephen this morning, you saw a couple of pictures about visual management. You heard about A3. This is, first of all, just seeing. Just seeing the work, we want to understand next. And then do something about it. Agree on various levels to say, okay, what do we see here? Is this contributing to what we wanted to achieve? Is this actually value we create for customers? Well, basically, who are our customers? That's the very first step. And then say, okay, if it's not really making progress towards we want it to be, what do we do about it? And then the next thing comes, okay, now, is the next thing this big J-curve, what we want to do about it? Or is it saying, well, maybe we need a couple of experiments? And I know experiment is not a very good term in corporate organizations. It's probably something you have to adapt for the organizational context. If you tell your boss you want to run a few experiments, you might not be very welcome. Learning is the very important next step. So what do we learn out of this? Experiments have to have a chance to fail. Don Reinertson's, for a specific context, it's important, but it just says, basically it should be a kind of 50-50 chance that, in general, experiments can fail. Otherwise, it's not an experiment, but just one step forward in a field where we're already certain about everything. Trust is one important thing here, and it's probably one icebreaker you might think about. This is a model from the book Decision to Trust by Robert Hurley, and it just shows two levels where you might think about trust. First of all, the trustor factors applying to the individual. So depending upon my position, I might have it easier or harder to buy into trust. And then the below factors, more the situational ones, which account for individual relationships. So whom would I trust under which circumstances? Who needs what in certain circumstances? And there is one interesting thing here to mention, where we always jump into this question, okay, the ideal state in an organization, which is really adapting fast, would be we're constantly doing the right thing right. Now the question here is where to start. Should we figure out, okay, what is the right thing before we even do something about our operations? Usually considering trust and trust building, because trust is like a bank account. We have to put some money into this account. We have to invest in order to get interest rates. Usually it is very helpful to start with a question, how can we do what we already do a little better, a little better, a little better? Because this way we increase the trust factor, the trust account in the organization. We increase the social capital, as we always call it. Makes it way easier later on after a while to buy in for other stakeholders and say, oh, wonderful, now that these guys are more or less, sticking to what they promised, don't get me wrong on these words, that they are able to deliver under the given circumstances, I am actually quite comfortable now to make also a step forward, and we might consider our business model together. So this is probably a very useful approach to get out of this hen-egg discussion, where to start first or do everything perfect. Now, if we really want to do something about the adaptive organization, I'd say we have 3 levels. The one I actually already mentioned inside, which is the operations, where the teams work, where the work is actually carried out, and we want to think about how can we improve what we do? How can we see what we do? How can we get better here? How can we react to the noises around our system? This can be, for example, well, we've got very long lead times to deliver value because we have little knowledge distribution, we have high dependencies on other departments, we don't work on these dependencies, we have dependencies with suppliers and so on and so forth, we've got quality issues, whatever it is, that's what's being worked upon in here. The leadership level is what I just mentioned, putting energy into the system and considering, okay, what could be the activities to actually bring leadership on different levels, to say leadership is actually, as we heard it today, not a role, not a something we put on people's shoulders, but it's actually a collaborative effort. Leadership is what makes our organization move further, which actually supports adaptiveness. And finally, considering the system we work within. So what are the boundaries we're shaping here? What can we do about the system? So basically it's about working inside the system, understanding, experimenting, learning on the team level, driving change and improvement. So really having this kind of energy, bringing it to the system, and considering the environment where we want to foster a more collaborative effort, where we want to have co-creation, not only within the organization, but also with partners, suppliers, and so on and so forth. And last but not least, where we actually can provide an inspirational workplace, because adapting to the environment shouldn't be only stress. It shouldn't be, a burden where we say, oh God, the environment is changing so fast, which means we have to operate faster, and basically, actually, we don't want this. We don't want to work here. Remember, it's all about people. People are not machines, and we actually want to have fun at work. This is possible, fortunately, in the domain we work in the knowledge workers domain. It's not so easy maybe at the factory floor in certain organizations, but we have, let's say, quite a gift here how we can deal with our systems. Now let's look into the system. Balancing the system is obviously a, let's say, key effort. If we talk about system, I actually separate the system into 2 parts. What you see here is one part which is basically focusing on delivery, and the other part which is focusing more or less on inventing maybe new business models, exploring new opportunities. So the way we distinguish these two is more or less calling the left side the exploration area, where we really want to figure out very, very quickly, before we even bother teams, the organization, with work, what could be the next important feature? What could be the next groundbreaking product? What could be our most important service which we deliver to certain markets? The right side is where we want to become better in our work, in our daily work. We usually call it exploitation. We already have a system in place. We don't want to change what we work upon in each team every day. But when we have the decision at this point, we want to get better and better and better. So these are two sides of one medal, and we want to get this in better and better balance. And the interesting thing here is, if you look on the left side where we more or less create options we want to explore, this is pretty near to what we call today the lean startup model. Very unusual in large organizations. So going into this direction, saying we want to create options here, we first of all have to consider what is actually our position, what is our strategy. I mean, very nice, we do what we do since 30 years, we do it even better and better and better, but let's consider our environment is changing. What's our future services about? What's our major business about? Who are our major stakeholders? We're creating options here, and we want to learn on this side without bothering the executing organization. So, how to get there? Well, I'm not sure whom of you read the Toyota Kata book or knows the Toyota Kata book. It's a very recommendable one. Because it's much about how do we get out of our known zones, of our known, let's say, being towards an unknown, uncertain future. And getting there is usually quite a trap. Mike Rother, I think he's a psychologist, studied the Toyota system from this perspective for years and came up with this book more or less explaining how Toyota approaches this daily, let's say, exploration path, where they just say, well, we have a mission, we have a vision, where we want to be, but this is just a kind of ideal state of the future. We don't bother much about how we get there in detail. You know, it's this kind of single piece flow, zero quality, and so on and so on. Well, do we have zero quality, zero defects? Was just to check if you're still awake. Zero defects. Now the question is, do we have zero defects with Toyota cars? Not sure if you drive a Toyota, but if we would have zero defects, we wouldn't have any kind of dealers who are repairing cars and so on and so forth. And the more important thing is to say, okay, how do we work on a daily basis in order to improve our, let's say, improvement muscle? Let's say to get better at adapting on a daily basis. And there is a nice gimmick here from Mike Rother, where he just, tries to make you a little bit aware of this. And, it's just a kind of question, what do you read here? I'm not sure if you're familiar with so much with English. Can you read something out of here? Jumping to conclusions, exactly. And that's what's behind the black bar. So what we already see, the brain is pretty well, let's say, prepared to use just very little information to come to conclusions, to make something out of it. And there are similar things like that. You know this one? Okay, what is it about? Same length, and yeah. And now this is a kind of visual distraction. I'm not sure if you call it in English, but there is one which is longer than the other. So this is now a trap, so double loop learning. It's quite interesting. What shall this tell you? Well, it's very easy to jump to conclusions. And if we deal with uncertainty, if we think about the future, if we work with our teams, with our leadership, with our managers, there is very often prejudice. Very quickly we come to conclusions what has to be done actually for the future. And unfortunately, very often this is just downloading existing patterns from the past which are not prepared for the future. Instead of just saying, let's forget about this, and let's just make our journey into the future a learning path where we just want to iterate very, very, very quickly towards an unknown state, which is our challenge. So the key essential here is we want to build this capability of not knowing, questioning what we know already, moving towards an unknown state into the organization. That's actually what this Toyota kata is all about. Leadership. Well, Management 3.0, I just want to mention it, won't dive too much into it. It's a fresh model. Jürgen is the author and probably the one single person who can tell you most about it. But obviously it's about leadership, or call it management, on all levels. It's really saying management is a collaborative effort. Yes, we need management in order to drive an organization, especially a large one, but obviously the command and control model doesn't help us to adapt quickly. So how can we make this kind of collaborative effort happen? And there's lots of practices here where we want to think about, well, first of all, what are the dysfunctions in our current organization? Just think about a few, this management by objectives on a very individual level, instead of breaking down targets to collaborative views, pay by performance, all the kind of meetings we have in the organizations which don't contribute to learning, and so on and so forth. Instead of having an open learning space where people can collaborate, communicate, and explore their current being into the future. That's what Management 3.0 helps you with as an existing leader, but also as a, let's say, call it normal worker or team member, to really consider, hey, management is something we can do something about. And there's lots of practices which you can directly apply. But again, the important thing here is not the practices alone. You have to, again, think about why. And you really have to think about, well, what is our principles here? And obviously the principles are more about, well, work can be inspirational. We just can, create inspirational workplaces in order to achieve better performance, in order to collaborate better, co-create with whomever in the organization, and move further, faster. Now there is another one about the system, and this is now really about this design effort. Design is something we know from a discipline, when you take nice products and, let's say, useful products in your hand. It's an effort where we want to consider what is actually the real user's real need. And there are many examples where design just failed, where we had a very good intent to, build, streets, infrastructure, whatever it takes for a certain purpose, but we just didn't take into consideration what people needed. We didn't walk in the customer's shoes. Design thinking, quite a simple discipline. I mean, it's a very powerful thing. It's not complicated. Became very popular over the past years because obviously it's a very similar approach as we apply it in our agile and lean environment. It's really about understanding, it's about learning, and it's really about fast adaptation, experimenting and fast adaptation. What we do in our work is we bring this design thinking process into designing organizations. Because what is the organization about? Basically, it's a service for the people working in there. And I can understand the organization as a product and the people as the customers. So what I can do here is basically using such a tool, just for example, the value proposition designer. It's just one tool out of many. In this case, it's an effort by Alex Osterwalder, the author of the business model generator. Not sure if you know this one, business model canvas. So this is a kind of extract from the business model canvas, and we just want to understand, okay, what is actually what our employees, our colleagues, our teams want to achieve? What is the jobs they have to do, and what are the pains and gains they experience? That's the first thing, the very first step, to start with understanding. The next one is, okay, looking at the opposite side and say, and what is our organization contributing to this? To which extent are we offering products and services? Again, this is the organization, the environment of the organization. And to which extent do we support gains and relieve pains? This is an approach we typically apply on various levels. This can be with a leadership team during the start of a change initiative. This can be permanently during the course of daily operations, applied in teams or really in a large group setting, where we, for example, might look into 100 people's departments. What we come with here is, first of all, ideas. This is just ideas, the ideating state. And the next question is, okay, what shall we do out of this? Again, we want to talk about change, but change in a way to say, not following the big J curve, but entering a very fast learning mode. Lean change, another model which helps very well at this stage, was coined by Jason Little and Jeff Anderson, I think together, and they have 2 different books on the market on this model. And basically it's about, well, if we start with insights we just generated in a collaborative effort, we want to consider, okay, which are the options we could realize? What would the single options generate in terms of value, and how could changes in terms of a minimum viable change, this term minimum viable product probably, look like in order to learn about it as fast as possible. Minimum viable changes we want to bring into experiments in the organization, and maybe starting on a team level or in a single department, and see if this change actually has an impact. If it has an impact, we might consider next, well, maybe it's something we might roll out or apply or, let's say, provide to others. If it didn't, well, it's a learning. But we didn't follow a big path with efforts, a big change program. We do this constantly, learning about possible changes which might help people. This is basically actually a kind of lean startup cycle. As you know, it build, measure, learn for change management. And of course, again, it's about applying visual management here, having a board where we might think about, okay, what buys into this change, what is against this change, and finally, really having change options being pulled in by teams. So we don't force them to do something, but we provide them options which they might buy into if they feel good about it. Okay, so I think it's, let's see, what's the time? Time to come to a conclusion. Thinking about building adaptive organizations is basically something where you have to take a systems view. So not only emphasizing single parameters, optimizing single elements, but you really have to always consider the whole. Trust is the first element which helps you starting to move the system. Leadership is something which you don't have to carry on your own shoulders if you're a manager. This is a very uncomfortable position. You probably know that managers, leaders, don't feel comfortable in this situation, where others might say, hey, they're so powerful, why don't they do more out of it? They're usually very, let's say, alone with their responsibility, as I said, not knowing what should be the next step. And leadership on all levels can also be a relief for your management. Ownership is a very important thing to make people buy into something instead of just saying, well, okay, we have to follow a plan. I try to do my best in order not to, being blamed. And if they change direction, okay, I will follow this direction. As long as I get my money, I'm fine here. This is not the way how to make a system going, how to make an organization adaptive. Going beyond IT, very important. Again, we are obviously coming from IT when we talk about agile, but we have to really move way beyond. It's really about end-to-end delivery, end-to-end services. Our customers, if we're not into IT core business, they don't buy for the single feature, for the, so well-tested functionality. They want to have an impact. And it's even more important not only to deliver products and features, it's even more important to learn about and close the loop here, if what we delivered created an impact. I think that's even more powerful than just saying, hey, we are totally adaptive and we deliver on demand and on premise, whatever it is. What we delivered, was it actually useful for people? And that sometimes makes people really think about, oh, well, actually, I didn't think about it. Well, we accepted it, but yeah, you're right. Well, if we look into our usage rate or what it changed, basically nothing. And maybe that makes them thinking to say, maybe next time with the next iteration, we should dive deeper and have a better understanding what we should, put on the road. Options. It's everything about options. Not only the conference, but the single pictures I showed you with the exploration and exploitation. You really want to create options and not commit too early, because this is really about options. Options are your friend when it comes to uncertainty. They give you choice, and if you commit late, you even have a better choice because something new might appear, new information might arrive, which you couldn't consider earlier. Aligning to purpose, alignment in general is very important. Why do we work as we want to work here? What are the principles where we believe we can be successful? And finally, consider opening the system. Co-creation inside the organization and also outside the organization. Adaptiveness doesn't mean, okay, we only move our vehicle further, but as you know, there is so many opportunities nowadays to start a new business, to start a collaboration, to just, again, also see here a service end-to-end, to form new alliances very quickly, and even to try out new partnerships as a kind of experiment. And change, finally, and this is, I think, my final word here, is a journey. It's more a kind of capability. It's nothing we just want to think about being managed. It's something we want to be capable of as an organization. It's something where we don't want to fear of it. We rather want to embrace it as we have it in our manifesto. And, well, this is a nice quote. I like this because I'm also sailing. And I always use this metaphor of sailing, comparing it to planning. And of course, you would never just go out there and say, hey, wonderful, I made my plan, and we just go ahead this direction, and the weather changes, I don't care, I have my plan. What we can do about change is we can basically adjust our sails on a daily basis. It's really up to us. Changing sails and moving the whole vehicle is a collaborative effort. If you have a big yacht, it's not only up to the skipper, maybe to the manager or the CEO, it's up to the whole crew. Okay, so this is my talk. If you have any questions, it's up to you. It's late. You're already late. Not sure if you're up to dinner. Are there any questions? What's the time actually? 10 to 6. There's a question. Is there a microphone? Oh yeah, now I remember. I didn't want to stand up here.
So sorry, you will be the unlucky guy to get this question, and I think you talked about this thing the least, but it's something I've been thinking from the morning, that failure is not a problem. Like, it's okay to fail. But as I was thinking about it throughout the day, with failure comes a price tag. Sometimes it's a small amount, sometimes it's a big amount. So obviously we are afraid of failure because there's a price to pay. So what do you say to organizations, to teams, how you deal with that price tag? And that's often why we blame people, because somebody has to pay for that failure. Mm-hmm.
Well, this is a very interesting one because we have this, safe to fail experiments quotes. We have, a couple of quotes around this, and still we know in reality it's not always easy. Neither on a personal level because we don't feel comfortable we failed. I sometimes don't. Because we don't grow up like this. You know, our whole education system is not prepared for this. We are permanently evaluated how we deliver, and we are delivered on a grade. You know, this test was bad, so you failed. Instead of thinking about the big picture, thinking about values. Hey, you collaborated. Basically, you didn't fail. I mean, there's this nice example, you know, cheating an exam. Basically, it's great. I mean, these guys might have not followed the rules, but they collaborated to approach a collaborative result. Very well valued in future organizations. There was an interesting article from Steve Blank the other day, I think last week, which I liked very much. It was exactly about this thing. How could large organizations, not sure if you know Steve Blank, he's one of these gurus in the lean startup world. How could large organizations adapt lean startup principles? And the biggest challenge, he says, is that large organizations are rather in this mode of running established business models. And obviously, running established business models with established procedures, which are sometimes even written down, failure is not expected. So reframing this and saying, okay, if we look at uncertainty and innovation, then basically this should and would mean that we cannot use existing practices here, but we have to learn how to approach certain problems with different measures. And this actually has to carry failure on board, because if we know nothing about this uncertain problem or domain and we don't have an established model yet and practices, what else could we do than just try and error on a let's say, educated basis? I believe using this term in organizations is pretty much about how we frame it. As I said about the experiments, it's also very often not, let's say, appreciated to talk about failure. Now, learning is obviously a different kind of wording which might be used here in saying, okay, it's nice that we failed, but basically, okay, what did we get out of it? Because if I bump my head permanently against the wall without learning that it hurts, well, I don't make progress. So I can say, okay, I failed, but if I don't stop at a certain point and say, okay, I learned now that my head is not made of steel and this wall is not made of paper, so what will I do next? Maybe I can do some other exercise. That's my kind of gray-shaded answer here. And there are probably thousands of additional answers. So any other question? Nearly? There was nearly one question. I heard something. Simon, you have a question? No? If there is no question, not sure. Is there any? If there is no question, Stephen, you have got a question.
It's not necessarily a question, but it's a great presentation. Loved it. Fabulous. So it seems a shame to pick up on one word, which is right in the middle, which was experimentation. And you talked about management fear of that. And I found that as well. I found one way of lessening the fear. I just wonder if you found out any other ways of lessening the fear. The only way I could lessen the fear of the word experimentation was to put one word in front of it, and that was controlled experimentation. And that gives some sense of control. It didn't change anything in practice. Do you have any other ideas of what you might do to lessen the fear of experimentation in organizations?
It's really a hard one. I think fear is an important one, first of all, because it's more or less the way, let's say, we assume performance or results from each other. It's also coming with blame. And, controlled experiment might might help. I don't use this term. I mean, yes, of course we control it because we have a hypothesis. We want to be able to measure it. So in a certain way, we have a limited amount of budget, time we put into something. So there is obviously a kind of control mechanism applied, which makes it easier to buy into. What I experience very often is managers, not really being able to understand their own position, their own role in terms of if they are the carrier of the result of the experiment, if they're still the ones who shall tell a team or a department what to do in terms of an experiment, or how to get out of this. To me, this is usually the cornerstone to say, hey, this is a collaborative thing. Actually, your job might be to, take care for the surroundings, for the environment, that they can do it, but your team would finally experiment. And the result is not about somebody to blame, you or somebody on the team or the team as a whole. But it's something, okay, we want to take a conclusion out of it. So my personal experience is to put managers, and that's interesting enough, into the driver's seat, although they actually think they are. But when it comes to change and things like this, they sometimes just say, well, I know my daily practices from the past. I would know what to do with the old style approach. I reached this point up here, but now you tell me about a different approach. I've got no idea what to do about it. And then they feel stressed or too relaxed, sometimes too relaxed, because they just say, oh, it's just, emerging things. Like finally we never reach any result. So I think this is important. You have to put energy in there and say, let's open your eyes. Let's consider what's happening here and what we want to aspire. But again, it's various possible approaches as there are people. If there is no further question, maybe there is, I'm not sure. There is another question. I already wanted to announce dinner.
It's interesting to see the part about the beware of just doing things. And I'm just interested in that, what if you are a Scrum Master and you are expected to keep these rules and practices? And who decides when you can, just break them? Well, there's a situation when, for example, you would say that, all right, maybe it's not the best thing to follow all these rules. However, the management wants you to keep all of them.
I mean, the first question I would have is, who is expecting here to have the Scrum Master following certain things? So where does the expectation come from? Is it somebody in the organization? Is it your former Scrum?
At management level.
Pardon?
Management level, generally.
Management. For me, it's always talking about
actually,
why.
they hire you to keep these rules because you are the Scrum Master, so they expect you to follow the rules of Scrum.
Well, if you experience this way, it's an interesting one, because what I experience usually is Scrum Masters coming back into the organization and say, my Scrum trainer told me. And you can read it in the Scrum Guide, so there is lots of discussions about Scrum, but I have to defend this, this whole scenery. So sometimes it's a kind of construction in our head. Well, if there is an explicit question from your management, my advice always is ask why. What is our assumptions? What is our fear? It's not about dropping rules just for adjusting it to the best possible comfort, because this way we don't learn anything. But it's about questioning, why are we doing what we're doing, and what could help us to get out of this and become better at it. I think that's so important. And instead of religiously following, kind of written rules. Yeah, that's my only advice. And usually, and that's my experience, if you talk to management in such a situation, you would expect, or you can probably expect a discussion. Because, they don't have a reason for saying, hey, you have to follow these rules A, B, C. They might be very, let's say, uncertain what this whole thing is about. And then hearing you starting a discussion, they might learn something new and say, okay, now we understand this better. And you know, it's sometimes we are the IT department, product owners come from business. If you're in a bank, this is sometimes a kind of, how can I call it, political issue, and we just want to cover our ass. So don't ask the customer, don't talk too much with the customer, even if it's a product owner in an agile environment. But basically, how can we be successful sitting in the same boat, in the same small boat, you know, within a windy environment? Yeah. So probably thinking about a couple of metaphors here can help triggering a good discussion.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, if there is no more question, and I think so, there wasn't too many before, I would, again, well, there is one person today joining dinner with a stranger. I'm not sure how this will work out, which is a pity. I'm not sure how your plans are tonight. Many of you might be from Budapest, but I would still recommend meeting, at least for a beer. Doesn't have to be late dinner, but, you know, continue discussions. It doesn't have to be at one of these places, and just enjoy the evening. That's what I want to wish you. Have a nice evening. See you tomorrow here in this place, and yeah, have a great time. Thanks for being here.